I'm Lise Avery of Anything Goes Syndicated Radio. I'm sitting here with Alan Pepper, the co-owner of the legendary nightclub The Bottom Line, in New York City for a lot of years.
30 years.
30 years. And the series producer of the Bottom Line Archives series of recordings, Greg Bendian. Thanks so much for being here with me, you guys. And tell me a little bit, what makes the Bottom Line legendary nightclub in New York City?
Well, the Bottom Line had run for 30 years. In fact, it closed 3 weeks short of its last, of its 30th anniversary. And the scope of the talent presented, we had a very eclectic approach to music. So everyone from Bruce Springsteen to Dolly Parton to Willie Nelson to Sonny Rollins to Dexter Gordon to Charles Mingus. And one of the things I'm most proud of, Aaron Copland performed on the stage of the Bottom Line.
Wow.
And so it actually, I think, became iconic to a lot of people because it was the place that's really credited with pushing Bruce Springsteen really into the limelight. He played this series of engagements at the Bottom Line in 1975, which was the Born to Run tour. And out of that, he got the cover of Time and Newsweek simultaneously, which is something that few people had done. And that show was broadcast on NEW, and that engagement is really credited with helping to really break his career. In fact, there's no book, to my knowledge, that's been written about Springsteen that doesn't mention the Bottom Line engagement. And one of the things that I found out recently, which really surprised me, there was a book that came out which is called Bruce, and in the book, it talks about Robert De Niro coming to see Springsteen, and that I remember, coming to see Springsteen. And Bruce had this thing at the end of his set to get the audience revved up, and to get an encore, he'd say to the audience, "You talking to me?" And so the audience would, respond, and he'd say, "I can't hear you. You talking to me?" And of course the audience would respond. And De Niro lifted that for Taxi Driver. He was in the audience and he gave it to the character in the
Come on.
And I was blown away by that. So I guess we contributed to pop culture, not only in helping to expose Springsteen to a larger audience, but we also, in a strange way, helped a major iconic movie called Taxi Driver. Or Bruce did. We just provided the stage for it.
There's an awful lot of stories about the Bottom Line, and I'd love to get into all of them, but I'd like to know, how do you guys know each other?
Can I start?
Please.
And then you can,
Why are we here together?
Greg Bendian, who's become a very dear friend of mine, used to come to the Bottom Line as a kid with his dad. His dad had very broad musical taste. So Greg was a teenager and used to come to the club to see all kinds of shows. In fact, to this day, I'm amazed when he and I talk and he'd say, "Oh yeah, I saw that show," or "I know that show." And then years later, Greg is a musician. He's a drummer. He's a percussionist and a drummer, and an arranger and a composer. And so years later, he approached me about his band called the Mahavishnu Project to play at the Bottom Line. And I booked the band, and Greg started to play at the club. And then when the club closed, he stayed in touch with me. And I had this really treasure trove of recordings that had been recorded at the Bottom Line. And I explored the possibility of putting out a box set of recordings, and I asked Greg if he would come on board and be the producer of this. But I will say something to you that I've only mentioned to you once before. This Greg came to the club a lot. He came with his dad. And the one time when Greg was performing at the club, I saw this guy sitting at a table with a video camera. And I went over to him and I said, "You can't do that. You can't and I said, "Shut it down." And the guy said, "Yeah, but I said, "Shut it down. You can't video." And it was Greg's dad, which I think I apologized to him for.
Yeah, you did.
But so all right, so that's how we met, and that's the deal.
And what was it like for you, Greg, to find yourself playing a gig at the Bottom Line after going there all those years with your dad?
It was fame and fortune, you know. It was success. It was the definition of playing the venue in New York. I knew that Alan would welcome what we were doing because he was so ensconced in every style of music. There were no barriers at the club. So when we started playing there, and then eventually when we got comfortable playing there, it just felt so much like home base, and it felt like everything we did there was okay, it was acceptable. So we would work in original music into the Mahavishnu sets, and that was okay. And you'd go back and get Alan and would pay you, and we'd have a talk, and so few venues ever had a guy who ran the club and would say, "Oh, you guys sounded really good tonight." Like he knew if we had a good show or not because he actually came out and listened. He didn't just sit in the office. So I immediately got the vibe that, oh, he's a music guy, he's not a business guy.
That makes all the difference when you're a musician.
And it's rare.
Yeah.
It's rare in the music business, especially when things started changing in the late 70s into the 80s and it became a business. And so I could spot a music guy a mile away because they were so few and far between. So Alan was the bridge between the music business and real music.
Stanley and I...
that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
So because you're speaking about he was not a business guy, he was a music guy. So that's why I wanted to ask about Stanley Snodowski.
Right.
And you ran the club with your wife Eileen,
right?
Right? And Stanley, who was the business guy, right?
Stanley and I were friends since we were about 10 or 11 years old. So we grew up together and we became business partners. And we were two sides of a coin. He was very rational and calculating and had an amazing sense of business, one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I was the one with the passion and flying by the seat of my pants. We liked different kinds of music. We went through a period of time where he loved folk music, and he could listen to records that he loved over and over and over again. And I didn't basically have that kind of patience. I wanted to hear more and more of different, of different stuff. And I love jazz. I became like very involved with jazz. So, and I absolutely loved it. And we formed an organization called Jazz Interactions, which was a nonprofit accepting corporation that allowed the mission of this organization, which was a nonprofit, and the mission was to try and educate people to the art form of jazz as the only pure American art form that actually developed in this country. And so to do that, we started setting up these jazz jam sessions where we would hire musicians to play. And I was a kid, I was at home, and my mother would say, "There's this guy on the phone to talk to, I think his name is Freddie Hubbard." My heart would stop. I'd say, "Freddie Hubbard is calling to talk to me, oh my God." And he was talking to me, he was calling me to get a gig at these, we paid very little. We paid $38 to the leader and I think $25 for the sideman, and it was three sets. And we do it in some club, and the whole notion was just to keep people working. I very quickly realized that if you controlled employment, you had power. I mean, when, one time I came out and I said, I came home and my mom said, I said, "Any calls?" She said, "This guy Rassan something." I said, "Rassan Roland Kirk?" And she said, "Yeah, I think that was his name." I said, "Oh my God." And okay, so I convinced Stanley. I said, "We have to open up a club." And he looked at me like, "What, are you insane?" And I said, "No, it'll be great. We'll break into the music business. It'll be fabulous." Well, so Stanley and I formed a business relationship, and we went on to open the Bottom Line. He was an attorney, and somebody when we were running the club The people used to refer to us as the Doberman and the Curious Cocker Spaniel. And I'll let you guess who was who. But he and I had a wonderful run together. He passed away a couple of years ago, and we were the closest of friends. I've never met anybody smarter. He had an ability to look at a situation and be able to know what the core was instantly. He was also a phenomenal negotiator. And I always said, if you got into an argument with Stanley, if you accepted his first premise, it was over. In other words, when I would fight with him, I would never accept as a given the first thing he would say, because he had such a logical mind. He could take you wherever he wanted to take you. So I always knew that once you accepted his first premise, game over.